And also, I want to talk a little bit about this other article that I sent to you, right? That
Mhm.
because Albert Colby, can we say he's like the Victoria Nuland against China? Because Victoria Nuland is very much obsessed with Russia. So
Yeah.
Albert Colby is the equivalent for China.
Yes, he is. That is, if interesting, you've made that point, but because I made exactly that same point in one
Okay.
of my own programs.
Okay.
I mean, there is a certain view that has gained currency in Europe and, by the way, in Russia, that Elbridge Colby is some kind of a moderate and a realist because he talks about, the United States reducing its um, footprint in Europe
Hmm.
and coming to some kind of an understanding with Russia. The only reason he wants to do that is so that he can concentrate all the American military to fight his war against China instead. He
Yeah.
is absolutely as obsessed with China as Victoria Nuland is with Russia.
Mhm.
It's the only argument between those two is which of these rivals America should strike first. Victoria Nuland says, let's strike against Russia because Russia is weaker. And that way we can weaken China. And Elbridge Colby says, no, let's strike at China first because it is stronger. And if we sort out China, then we don't need to worry about Russia anymore. We can just impose whatever we want on them. But that is the only argument between the two.
These are really dangerous people.
Oh,
So Elbridge Colby, right? The article he wrote was a nuclear strategy and posture for 2030,
yeah,
and he wrote it in
yeah,
2015. But the situations
yeah,
he's talking about is pretty current. So here's what he said, right? In the situation in which the United States has lost the conventional advantage, which is happening right now, right?
yeah,
However, U.S. nuclear weapons should play a pivotal role in bringing a war the United States and its allies are losing to a tolerable close. How horrible is that? He's basically
yeah,
saying we can tolerate a nuclear war.
yeah, absolutely.
What,
I know.
how can you say that when the nuclear war started? How can you have a tolerable close,
I know.
right?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I mean, again, coming back to what we said about the Hudson Institute article, I mean, these ideas are evil ideas. I mean, they are evil ideas. It's interesting because when I read his piece, which you sent to me, as you said, it's from 2015. As it happens, I wrote an article in 2015, but I can't find it. I've
Hmm.
managed to mislay it. It's on the Duran somewhere, and
Okay.
my brother will find it. But at that very same time, I was writing an article also saying that the United States is facing a resource crisis. It cannot take on China, Russia, all these other countries, all at the same Iran, North Korea, wherever. It cannot take them all on at the same time. It is ridiculous. But I came to the diametrically opposite conclusion to the one that Elbridge Colby has come to, which is don't think about nuclear war. Stop thinking about any of these things. What I suggested then was what I called a geopolitical ceasefire, a situation where the United States comes to an understanding with all of these countries, especially China, to regulate its relations peacefully, to sort out the problems between them peacefully, to give the United States time to sort out its affairs and not to involve itself in Chinese problems anymore. And I said that was the only proper way forward. Well, we see Elbridge Colby, who is obviously dominates American foreign policy now. I mean, he's clearly the most important thinker within the Trump administration. I mean, he's the guiding light there. I should make that clear. And of course, you can see which direction he is going, and other people in the United States are following him. Here we have someone who talks about taking nuclear war to a tolerable conclusion, and he's now the Assistant Secretary of Defense.
But these people are very influential. You see the thing that
No,
they're
I
not
mean he's
elected, but they are very influential. Okay.
well. I mean, if you're the Assistant Secretary of Defense, in charge of policy, by the way, you are not only influential, you are in power. And I think that's the thing people in China need to understand. The Hudson Institute paper, Elbridge, Colby's views, they dovetail with each other.
Yeah. I mean, it's scary. I mean, when I was reading him, just this whole paragraph, I wanted my viewers to listen, to hear it. Will such a loss of conventional advantage appear unlikely for the near term? The eventuality could develop in particular in maritime Asia, where the United States could lose its conventional dominance should it not take sufficiently effective and resolute actions to maintain its margin over the PRC, People's Republic of China. In such an event, U.S. nuclear forces will need to provide the United States with credible options for controlled escalation against China, options designed to telegraph a firm U.S. resolve to continue escalating positively influence the conventional military conflict that would be the presumed precursor for such use and demonstrate a willingness to end the conflict on mutually satisfactory terms. What does that mean? Mutually satisfactory terms.
I mean, in nuclear war. I mean, in madness. I mean, madness, absolute madness. And of course, they will have read that in Beijing. They will have discussed that article in Zhongnanhai. The government in China will be well informed about the fact that Elbridge Colby has been given this influential position in the Pentagon today. They will say to themselves, here is a man who is openly talking about nuclear war with our country and appears to believe that this will result in what he calls a mutually satisfactory conclusion. So we have to make sure that this kind of threat cannot be made against China. And how do we do that? By building up our nuclear forces, which is exactly what China is doing. And I mean, when people then come back and say that this is aggressiveness by China, well, find me an article written by a Chinese Elbridge Colby that makes the same proposals about war with the United States.
They always, when they talk about how aggressive China is, they always tell you half of the story, right? They would say, you see, they build up their nuclear arsenals and that's aggressive. They don't mention articles like this, very threatening articles like this. I recently saw an interview with some kind of I guess, expert in chips and those kind of things, rare earth. And she's talking about China weaponized rare earths. If you listen to her statement, it sounds like China's the one who started the weaponized the rare earth. Just out of blue, China started to stop selling rare earths to other countries without ever mentioning all the things happening lead up to it. It's incredible.
I know. I mean, well, we haven't weaponized the dollar. We haven't weaponized tariffs, which is what we're doing now. We haven't imposed sanctions on other countries. We aren't sitting back and letting food, the denial of food, be used as a weapon in Gaza. But you see, the Chinese are weaponizing rare earths, which is something. Well, I mean, you can get very angry. I mean, I do sometimes get very, very angry when you think about these things. I mean, the hypocrisy is just so huge, and the sense of entitlement as well is so enormous that it just leaves you speechless.
Okay, so the Ukraine war right now, there's several things happening. So they talked again. There's a peace talk, right? I think 2 days ago. Generate anything? What's your read on that?
Well, what the Russians proposed was that the two parties, the two delegations, form 3 working parties to study each aspect of the problem. Now, if you're looking for a solution to this very long conflict in the kind of way that Donald Trump wants in 50 days or something, then obviously that isn't taking you anywhere very far. But inherently, setting up working parties seems to me like a good idea. I mean, it lays the basis for more substantive negotiations going forward, which might in time lead to an outcome. So I wouldn't say that these negotiations in Istanbul were a complete failure. Of course, the Ukrainians haven't yet agreed to that proposal. But the basic problem with the whole negotiating process in over Ukraine, and by the way, there was an excellent article in Global Times which grasped this. The whole problem is that the West and Ukraine simply refuse to recognize that Russia has any serious or legitimate security concerns. Until and unless they do, then it's difficult to see how this negotiation can move forward.
Just like the woman talking about the rare earth, like nothing mentioned
No,
lead up
no,
to it. They don't mention everything lead up to the war in
yeah,
Ukraine, right?
yes,
Yeah, and I think that's the problem because why would Russia? I mean, if I were Russia, why would I agree with you on anything? They had two Minsk agreements,
yes,
right? And it amounts to nothing. So
exactly.
I I don't know, but
No, you're completely right. I mean, the Russians, of course, complain about this all the time, and I think people in China understand this. I mean, as I said, that was the article in Global Times was brilliant, by the way. It was if I was on an article, it was an editorial in Global Times.
Mhm.
It was absolutely brilliant about it, and it showed an exceptional understanding of the problem. But as I said, it's not one that's ever discussed in the West. There's an article by a man called George Beebe, who I slightly know, who is a former American intelligence officer, a very senior one, but he makes exactly the same point. And he says, that in the West, everything is focused on what Ukraine needs
Mhm. Mhm.
and what Ukraine wants.
Mhm.
There's never any question of asking what Russia needs and what Russia wants. And I mean, if you approach any kind of negotiation to end a war in that kind of way, you're not going to get anywhere at all.
And in the meantime, Russia has recently heavily bombed Kyiv, right, with
Yeah,
drones and missiles, and also something interesting is there's demonstration now against
yeah, yeah.
Zelensky. Are they tired of Zelensky? Are they getting ready
Yes,
to color
yes.
revolution him?
No, I don't think so. I think he is still in control, and I don't think he's going to fall anytime soon.
Okay.
But yes, they are getting tired of Zelensky. And I mean, there were articles already, especially in the British media, saying this over the last couple of weeks. And they were not by people who I would expect to be connected to the intelligence services. In other words, these weren't planted articles intended to undermine Zelensky because somebody in Washington wants to overthrow him or anything of that kind. I mean, articles like that do get written, but these were not like that. And the people who wrote them were huge people who've been up to now huge admirers of Zelensky and are
Hmm.
fervent supporters of Ukraine. But several of them have recently, the last couple of weeks, been to Kiev and they've come back shocked. One of them was Gideon Rackman in the Financial Times, and the other one was a man called Owen Matthews, writing for The Spectator. And they both came back with shock. They found the country very, very demoralized, the situation becoming very, very bad. And as you correctly said, the missile and drone strikes across Ukraine are escalating, and Ukraine doesn't seem to have any means to counter this. And people are increasingly saying that there has to be peace, and Zelensky isn't providing peace. And there's growing concerns and suspicions, which predated Zelensky's latest moves. There's been growing concerns about corruption. The corruption in Ukraine is getting worse because as more people in government start to sense that things are falling apart or going wrong, they're starting to steal more, which
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
I've seen happen many times.
So they are more desperate, preparing
Yeah.
for their own after, defeat, kind of a.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. I remember this in South Vietnam. And I
Hmm.
remember this well, obviously in Afghanistan too.
Hmm.
In Afghanistan, when the former president fled, he carried so many suitcases of money with him that two of them had to be left behind at the airport, on the runway, in fact.
Isn't that interesting? They always pick those corrupted people to be their
Absolutely.
puppet.
Well, because they can control them.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
mean, people who are not corrupt, people who have principle and patriotism, you can't control in that way. So they always go for corrupt and unusual people like
Mm.
like Zelensky or
Mm.
Chiang Kai-shek.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
saying.
Yeah, Jack is also very, in particular his wife, it's tremendous.
Yeah.
The family, the Song family is tremendously corrupt. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.